The Water Wars, Chapter 4, page 35. After that, Will and I became obsessed with Kai's river, but no matter how many times we asked, cajoled, or flattered him, Kai wouldn't say anything else. His father had sworn him to silence, and as much as he wanted to impress us, he feared his father more. But that didn't stop us from trying. One morning when Kai met us at the bus stop, Will said, "Kai, let's go to the river today." Kai said, "You can't just pick up and walk there." So we knew it was beyond the boundaries of Arch. Another day I said, "I wish we could take a boat down that river." And Kai said, "It's not a river for boating." So we knew the river would be shallow and fast. In this way, we learned things without Kai even knowing. We learned, for example, that the river traversed the border with the Republic of Minnesota, territory thick with pirates. We learned that men had tried to find the river for years but had given up because they thought it was a myth. We learned that water from the river began in secret places where no man could reach, in high mountain crags and deep valleys protected by violent winds. But we could not convince Kai to tell us the location. A month passed. Our mother got no better. Our father seemed more tired and haggard than before. The days got shorter but no cooler. Merchants draped yellow, gold, and red banners across their windows to remind us of autumn, but they couldn't disguise the monochromatic sameness of the earth and sky. The wind blew harder, and no dry shower could remove the grit permanently embedded beneath our nails or stuck in our skin itself. Each morning I saw Kai at the bus stop when I went to school, and he was waiting there when Will and I returned. He seemed bored and restless, but refused to go to school because he didn't have to. "They don't teach you anything there," he said, "nothing worth knowing." I disagreed. I had learned a lot in school about butterflies and sandworms, about drainage and absorption, about how water is made of gases that float in the air. "If you don't go to school, they'll send you straight to the army," I said. "Will's going to the army," Kai countered. At least Will's service was only for 12 months. The kids who dropped out of school ended up in the army for years, or worse. Without a job on the outside or a sponsor, they had nothing to leave for and few reasons for the army to release them. "Anyway, I have a job. I work for my father," Kai reminded me. It had been 2 months since I'd met him, and I still hadn't seen Kai do any work for his father, but he insisted he was there when his father needed him, and I didn't know enough about the drilling business to recognize if that was just an excuse. We were walking in the direction of my building, the only ones on the road for miles. In the distance, we could see the glass facade of a shopping mall, gaping bricks and metal rebar. There weren't enough people to keep buying things, and most businesses had been shuttered or moved back to the central core. Scavengers had picked over the most valuable materials, and the rest of the building was slowly falling into a heap. That was what it looked like all across Arch and across the entire republic, as far as I could tell. People gathered in close proximity to one another, and anything unprotected was left to criminals and the elements. Everything fell apart. That was the only constant. In 9 months, I would lose my brother to the army. I couldn't bear thinking about what would happen once he left home. He promised he would be fine, but I knew boys left all the time and were scarred forever. If anything happened to Will, I didn't know if I could go on. And what of Kai? When I thought of him, I felt a sudden flush creep up my neck. I cast a sidelong glance at him, but he didn't seem to notice. He didn't look anything like the dark and muscular heroes in the romance screens I sometimes read. Besides, I was too young for a boyfriend. That's what my parents had said, even though plenty of girls my age were pairing up. There was one boy last year who had followed me around, but he was creepy and left me alone when Will threatened to beat him up. With Kai, however, I grew more flustered as we walked further, and I didn't hear it when he asked me if he could come over. "If you'd like," I said, after he repeated his question. "My father should be home," I added, in case he got the wrong idea. We entered the grounds of our complex, passing the empty guard station and the useless and crumbling concrete barriers. Long ago, these buildings had been built for retirees who needed security and extra care. But these days, few people lived long enough to retire, and there was no money for their care anyway. The guards disappeared first, followed by the upkeep and maintenance. Now we patched our own walls and prayed that the electric wiring would not fail. Kai climbed the steps ahead of me, his calves outlined against the thin fabric of his trousers. He rang the buzzer, and my father welcomed us. He offered us a snack of crackers and soy cheese, which Kai was happy to accept. We ate in the living room and played board games. The Y screen glowed softly in the background, playing its constant stream of news, entertainment, and information. We ignored it. It was too early for homework, and I never had much anyway. Will returned, and the three of us swapped stories while Will tried to extract more information about the river. Soon this became our regular schedule. Our father would leave the door unlocked with a plate of cheese and crackers at the table. Most of the time he would greet us in the kitchen, but sometimes he would let us be. Kai and I grew comfortable with his absence, and I almost forgot the tension of having a boy in my home without a chaperone. At the end of every day, when the black limousine arrived outside our building, Kai seemed reluctant to leave. More than once our father took pity and invited him to dinner. Then we would prolong our game playing or storytelling until it was finally time for me to do my homework. When Kai was long gone, I'd take a dry shower, set out my clothing for the morning, and read from my mother's collection of great books of the 20th century, a 10-volume set with torn paper pages, cracked bindings, and scribbled pen markings, the only bound paper volume in our home. "Poor boy," our father would say. "He's not poor," said Will, but we knew what he meant. We just had to look into the bedroom to imagine what it must be like to lose your mother at an early age. Kai feigned indifference, but I understood better than he thought I did. When I tried to get him to talk about his mother, he shrugged and said he really didn't remember her. He wouldn't say much about his father, except that he traveled a lot. Although he was open about his diabetes and showed me the workings of his insulin pen, he didn't talk much about the disease. He only spoke about the mechanics of treating himself. Mostly we talked about scavenging and adventure and places we wanted to see. Kai mentioned the great Arctic Ocean, so large it had swallowed Iceland and most of Greenland. I said I'd always wanted to see the Great Dam of China. We played board games, word games, and number games. Kai had a stunning memory and could always recall where a card was hidden or when a piece was last played. He won most of our contests and could even beat Will in Counts, a card game that required a quick hand and an even quicker mind for numbers. When Kai went home, Will and I stayed up late speculating about him. Will said Kai feared his father and the burden of keeping the river secret. I said Kai missed his mother and was lost without her. Will teased me and said I was falling for him. I told him I wasn't interested in boys, especially not one whose father wouldn't even let us visit his home. But long after we stopped talking, I would lie in bed thinking about the way Kai's pale hair fell in front of his eyes, and how he bent his head as if he were praying when he listened to me talk. One weekend morning, our father surprised us with 3 passes to the gaming center. It was a place we begged to go to, but usually could not afford. Ever since we had gone to a party there last year, going back was all we talked about. It was a lukewarm, dry Saturday with no rain in sight, but suddenly the day seemed full of promise. Our father explained that he had traded some of Kai's water for the passes, but I noticed no water was missing. We didn't question our good fortune, however, just took the passes and assured our father we would take Kai along. In 5 minutes we were dressed and ready to go, but it took another 30 minutes to reach Kai on the wireless. First we had no signal, then we had a signal but no response. Finally Kai White texted us back and we made arrangements to meet. We couldn't use our petacycles because Kai didn't have one, and the black limousine was with his father. So our father told Will he could take our car. Will jumped at the chance. Kai was waiting outside his building when we arrived, looking as indifferent as he had the first morning we met. But he grinned broadly when he saw Will driving and actually skipped a step or two on his way to the car. "Cool wheels," he said when he climbed inside, although the old car was anything but, and that made us all laugh. Driving anything was unusual, with gasoline so hard to come by and the electric grid so unreliable. Will sat a little higher in the driver's seat as we headed down the road. Main Street was rutted and derelict. Most of the old stores had been shuttered or reconstructed to sell things we still bought: tarps, basins, dry beans, soy bread, and small construction equipment. There were 5 hardware stores, but no drugstore, 3 gun shops, but no bank. The signs of older times could still be seen on the facades of sealed buildings: Gap, Starbucks, Abercrombie and Fitch, merchants that had sold things people didn't necessarily need, but always wanted. The gaming center was in the middle of town next to the water reclamation park. It had been built from the ruins of the old government building that had been bombed when Illinois had declared its independence from the national government in Washington, D.C., back when there were 50 states and not 6 republics. The chief administrator had his office on the top floor, and whatever government existed in Arch conducted its business upstairs. Will swung the car around to the front and parked in the open lot. Our father had given us credit chips, and though Kai certainly didn't need one, he accepted his graciously. We dashed from the car as soon as Will switched it off and entered the center to the hum of the Venta unit and the buzz of generators, consoles, and players. Although the front of the center was open to the street, the rest of the building was windowless, which reduced the glare on the consoles. In place of windows, the owners had painted murals, lush forests, mist rising from the trees, exotic animals frolicking in the underbrush. The effect was both exhilarating and melancholy, but after a while the feeling wore off, replaced by something like yearning. This made the gamers play harder and longer, seeking the narcotic of the games. It was, of course, the reason the center was decorated this way. Gamers checked in, but they didn't check out until they'd spent their last credit chips. While the center had its share of children and teens, there were also groups of shakers, men mostly, who looked as if they had been playing all night. Like many older people, their hands shook from years of thirst. They also had the wild-eyed look of drug addicts with unkempt hair and clothing that appeared to have slept in. They swiped their game passes in front of the machines like bots, one mechanized sweep after another. Even when they won, their eyes remained glazed and skittery. One victory, another free game, was meaningless. All that mattered was the drug itself. The chief administrator himself was said to be an avid fan and could be found here with his cronies long after dark. Kai tapped me on the arm. "Shoot out," he said. Will had already run off to play the driving games he liked best. I could see him at the pedals of the race car, both hands working intensely to control the course. He didn't even notice us as we walked past, but I kept him within sight. Kai was a terrible shot. His skill with numbers was no substitute for sharp eyesight. We played 5 times in a row, and I beat him every game. Losing, however, did not dim his fun. He screeched and whooped and hollered. As I moved my men to avoid his rockets, he simply sat in the open and took my fire. If he had a strategy, it was to fire furiously and indiscriminately, hoping to overcome with quantity what he could not with quality. "That was fun," he said. "Double or nothing." His face was flushed, and he had pushed his hair above his forehead. "You already owe me more credit chips than you have. We'll bet something else." "Like what?" "What do you want?" What did I want? He looked at me expectantly as I tried to sort the confusing puzzle that was my mind, but I couldn't say, so I just said, "Okay, one more game and then we'll play something else." I beat him for the 6th time, and he teased me, calling it beginner's luck. It wasn't luck, I told him, if your aim was true. We played another game called Geyser, where the object was to find water and make it emerge in a powerful jet. The higher it sprayed, the more points you got. I didn't like wasting all that water, even in a game, and I quit after 2 tries. Kai played 3 more times by himself, and I wandered through the arcade. There was a U2 booth where you could film yourself, add music and mash in with other clips, or post videos on the wireless. 2 girls performed a clumsy dance routine, which they immediately uploaded and viewed on one of the big screens that broadcast a continuous stream of content to anyone with a wireless. Although most homes lacked the technology to broadcast, nearly everyone had a Y screen for watching and texting. In a matter of minutes, they received 10,000 views and a rating of 1.2 out of 5. Disappointed, the girls insisted on making another video, and I moved on. A group of boys was crowded behind Will, cheering him on as he set a new high score on Death Racer. Nearby, 2 girls tried to catch the boys' attention. Over by Kai, 2 men in identical blue shirts and black trousers played their own game of Geyser. They had a terrible time figuring out how to play, and their eyes wandered from the screen. As a waste of credit, I thought. At least they could step aside and let someone else have a turn. But their low scores failed to dim their addiction to losing. I made my way to Will. He stopped playing to chat with me. This earned me admiring stares from some of the boys and glares from the girls. Will asked if I wanted to race against him, but I knew better than to compete with him at his best event. Instead, I suggested he race Kai. The boys chose their cars. Kai picked a lime green electric coupe, while Will chose a velvet blue hydro racer. The cars were steered by 2 hand paddles. Speed was controlled by a foot pedal. Another pedal shifted gears. The course Will selected was an Arctic tundra populated by polar bears and baby seals, animals that had once lived where the ground was still frozen. The gun sounded and Will flew over the landscape, his racer dodging snowdrifts and navigating sub-zero waterways. Kai slipped and skidded on the curvy road, crashing several times into icy mountainsides. Once he went straight through a colony of seals, losing thousands of points for each seal he hit. but Will and Kai hooted loudly as they were engaged in neck-and-neck race instead of a blowout. Their excitement spread to the small crowd of teens who had gathered around them. The girls who had figured out Will was my brother wanted to know where we lived and what classes we took. The boys shouted advice to Kai, giving him tips on how to avoid the treacherous roads and packs of bears who tried to ambush him. I couldn't stop smiling. It was more fun than we'd had in a long time. It didn't matter that it was just a game and not even a very good one. Playing together, being there with Kai and my brother and a group of kids I could imagine were friends, made me forget that our mother lay sick in her bed, dreadfully, inexplicably sick. The narcotic of the game worked its magic, and we were drawn inside. The cars raced toward the finish line, over and under, around and through. Will was unbeatable and unstoppable, and I was proud to be his sister. Then I had an uncomfortable sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck, as if someone were watching me. From the corner of my eye, I saw the two men in the blue shirts staring at us, heads angled low, gazes slanted in our direction. They seemed unnaturally interested, with eyes for no one else in the room. But when I turned, the men were gone, and I wondered whether I had seen them at all.